Hello, my name is Jason and welcome to the hardware training video for the Brother embroidery machine. Okay, so the first section of learning to use the Brother embroidery machine is going to be fabric preparation. The goal of fabric preparation is to secure our fabric so that while we are embroidering, it is as stiff as possible and doesn't warp or move as the machine is stitching into it. So first we are going to look below the machine here and select one of our hoops. Hoops are what we use to secure our fabric and make sure they wiggle as little as possible. We have this inner frame and this outer frame, and the fabric sort of gets sandwiched between them. So you can see that this loops around it and there's a little bit of space there. That's where your fabric goes. On each hoop, there is also a little embossed plastic section that shows you how large they are. And your goal here is just to match this to whatever you selected in the software section. In my case, it's going to be the 100 by 100. So I'm going to take this and I am going to move over here and actually just put this aside for now. The first step of fabric preparation is going to be having your fabric and ideally ironing it. Assuming you're watching this video, you probably know how to use an iron, but just so you know, we have some irons here in Craftroom. You just plug them in, set them to the heat setting you need, and iron your fabric with our lovely ironing board here. For the sake of saving time, I'm not going to show that today, but yes. Now, once you have your fabric ironed to remove any wrinkles, we need to do what's called applying stabilizer to the back of our embroidery area. Fabric is usually somewhat stretchy, and that means that while you're embroidering, it can warp a little bit because each stitch squeezes the fabric a little bit. So if it has any stretch to it, that tension will cause it to warp and move. In order to combat that, we apply something rigid to the back of it, in this case stabilizer, so that the squishy thing will not move relative to the stable thing. And we can see an example of that over here where somebody has previously embroidered this squid. On the back of it we see this paper. This is stabilizer. So while the fabric has a lot of stretch to it, this is just paper. It's not going to move at all. And that's how we are going to achieve very clean looking embroidery designs. So now that I've successfully flipped this inside out, I am just going to arbitrarily decide that I want to embroider somewhere over here. So now we get into our selection of stabilizers. At this point, we should be rolling some B-roll of where you can get the stabilizer. It's in a little wooden cabinet below the heat press. And there are 3 different types of stabilizers we can use alongside our spray adhesive. Okay, so we're going to discuss the different types of stabilizer we have. The first one is going to be this right here. This is our water-soluble stabilizer. When I talk about our different types of stabilizers, we are going to essentially be talking about the trade-off between ease of removal and thickness/stability. Water-soluble stabilizer is the easiest to remove because once you're done embroidering, you just immerse your fabric in water and it will dissolve away. However, it is also very thin. That means that you only really want to consider water-soluble stabilizer as a backing stabilizer for very rigid fabrics like felt or canvas or denim, stuff that's already not really going to move that much. The other really useful thing you can do with water-soluble stabilizer is use it as a topper layer. When you have really thick fabrics, for example, some sweaters, stabilizing the back may not always stabilize the top of the threads because you can think about sort of like a jello on a plate, where even though the bottom is stable because it's adhered to the plate, the top can still jiggle around a bit. That effect applies to thick fabrics as well. So by applying a top layer of water-soluble stabilizer, you can avoid that. The reason we use water-soluble for that is because the top layer is where you actually see your embroidery design. So your top priority is making sure it looks good. And because of that, being able to dissolve it is really helpful. Moving on from water-soluble stabilizer, we get to our next thickest and therefore next most stable stabilizer, and that is this adhesive tearaway stabilizer. Tearaway stabilizer will not dissolve as easily as water-soluble stabilizer, but the way you remove it when you're done embroidering is literally tearing it away from your fabric. This is particularly good for something like a polo shirt. It's not super rigid, but it's also not super stretchy. It's just kind of your middle-of-the-road stabilizer. The primary reason you would be attracted to using this stabilizer is that it is adhesive. The water-soluble stabilizer and the third one that I'm going to talk about in a minute are both just kind of non-adhesive, so you need to use our spray adhesive that we have in the same supply drawer that you've seen before to adhere them to your fabric. But this stuff, you just cut out your rectangle, peel the back of it, and apply it to your fabric. So yeah, middle of the road, tearaway stabilizer. This is actually what I'm going to be using to model today. Last but not least, we have this, which is our cutaway stabilizer. It's very obvious when you pick it up that this stuff is our thickest stabilizer. It's just kind of always going to give you the best results because it's the thickest and most stable. I would recommend this for almost any embroidery application as long as you don't want the ease of use of the other two. Okay, so we are now going to show you how to apply stabilizer to your fabric and how to get that stabilized fabric into your hoop. So briefly, when you select a hoop, you have these two components here, the inner frame and the outer frame, which goes around it like that. This outer frame is possible to tighten using this thumb screw here. As I spin this clockwise, this hoop tightens, and eventually it's tight enough that it doesn't fall off. We want to loosen this so that it has enough clearance to put the fabric in, and that's kind of just, you do it by eye. There's not really a method to it. So I'm just going to loosen that for now, and we're going to come back to this in a second. I need to put stabilizer on this shirt, so right now it is actually turned inside out. You want to stabilize the back of your fabric so that you don't have to see your stabilizer, unless of course you're using a topper layer like I mentioned with the water-soluble stabilizer. So I want to use my self-adhesive tearaway stabilizer today, so I'm going to go ahead and get this out. And the amount of stabilizer that you want to use is going to be a rectangle that is just slightly larger than the hoop you are embroidering in. So I will take the outer frame here, place it on the shirt, and just use it as a little guide for how big I want my stabilizer to be. So I'm going to take some general purpose scissors here. Don't you dare use pinking shears or I will find you. And I'm going to cut out a rectangle of about this size. All right, put the rest of that aside for now. And then, like I mentioned before, your self-adhesive tearaway stabilizer is actually like a sticker. So with some effort, I can peel the corner up here, and then we get the actual stabilizer part in my left hand and this backing on the right, which is just trash, and I'll put that aside. It's kind of sticking to itself here, but that's all right. So yeah, I'm just going to put this stabilizer on the back of where I'm trying to embroider. It's very important at this point that you've gotten out wrinkles in your fabric, because if you put stabilizer on wrinkled fabric, you'll be preserving those wrinkles on the other side. Now that I have stabilizer on the back of where I want to embroider, I'm just going to turn this shirt back outside out so that we can actually insert it into the hoop. Okay. So we have our shirt outside out, and under here we have our stabilizer. To get this into the hoop, I am going to insert the outer hoop here, the one with the turning thumb screw, into the shirt. Note that I'm not putting this under the shirt, I'm putting it into the shirt because you only want one layer of fabric between the outer hoop and the inner hoop. If you put two, it's going to stitch your shirt together. With that there, I am going to somewhat blindly put this on top of the fabric and push it into the outer hoop through the fabric. So I can feel that my inner hoop, or my outer hoop, is roughly there. I position the inner hoop above it, and then when I push down, it sets into place. This is something that you kind of do by feel, but yeah, you just kind of have to get used to it. Now, our goal when we do this is to produce a drum-like texture when I do this. When I poke this, I can see there's a lot of play to it and a lot of loose fabric. So what I'm going to do is put this back down. I'm going to tighten the thumb screw partially, not all the way because I still want the fabric to be able to tighten a little bit, but I'm going to tighten it partially, and then I'm going to use both my hands to pull the edges of the fabric around. If I don't use my left hand to hold this inner hoop in, when I pull the edges, it's actually just going to pull the inner hoop out of the outer hoop. So using your left hand, stabilize this, and using your right hand, go around the perimeter, pulling your fabric as tight as you can make it. I can hear the fabric moving under there, so I know I'm making some progress here. And I'm switching hands here. So I'm just going to pull the edges until this is as stable as possible. And then I'm going to fully tighten down this thumb screw now, just in here. And now, when I hold this up, it is much tighter than it was before. I don't know if you can hear it through the mic, but it sounds like a drum, which means my fabric is properly stabilized. So that is the end of fabric stabilization. If you can get to this point, and this is relatively rigid, you're good. The next section of the embroidery training is going to be learning how to thread the machine so that we can actually create our design. So first things first, turning on the machine. In the very back right corner, over here by the power cord, there's a little switch that I'm just going to flip, and that's going to turn the machine on. You will need to be signed into SUMS for this to work, so just make sure that you've scanned your buzz card, logged into the machine, and then you can turn it on. If this is your embroidery test, just get the trainer to sign in for you, and that should work fine. And now the machine looks to be started. So before we start threading, I am actually going to pull up a model design, and right now it's going to seem really weird why I'm doing that, but it'll become clear soon. So to pull up a model design, what I always do is I just click this heart right here, I click the heart again, click the heart a third time, and then I'm going to come down to this bottom left corner and click Embroidery. This actually pulls up the menu for running an embroidery design, but you'll notice that the machine just threw an error. It says to change to a larger embroidery frame. One thing that's nice about the Brother machine is that it is pretty smart in that it knows how wide your hoop is. Each hoop that we have has a slightly different width for when you're loading into the machine, and in this case, the hoop that the machine thinks it's set up for is too small to run the heart design. So I need to make this larger. This frame here defines how large the hoop is. The right arm is stable, you can't move this, but the left arm can move. Now it's going to be a little hard to see on camera, but in the back here, there are 2 thumb screws. And if I loosen these, then I can actually slide this around. So what I'm going to do is loosen this inner thumb screw right here, and then I'm going to loosen the outer one on the corner. And again, this is all on the left arm. You can't do this to the right arm. With these 2 loosened, I can slide this around, and this is going to be even harder to see on camera, but there are actually little notches on the left arm, and you'll feel them snap into place as you get to each hoop size. So I just happen to know through experience that the second notch is the right one to use for this embroidery. So I'm going to tighten this down once it's lined up with the second notch. And I'll tighten the inner one, I'll tighten the outer one. And now if I go back to the display panel over here and I click OK, it should actually be happy when I click embroidery again. And yes, it lets me pull it up. So this screen is where we actually run embroidery designs from, but we are not interested in running it. For now, we are going to sort of ignore this. We are going to be threading the machine right now. Okay, so when we are about to thread the machine, obviously we need to pick what colors we're using. So over here we can see all of the threads that Craftland has to offer. Down here we have our general purpose threads. These you're basically going to ignore for embroidery. These are thinner threads we just use for sewing, but they're too weak to put on the embroidery machine. Up here, you can see it's labeled embroidery. We have all these shiny looking threads here, and these are just what you're going to use for embroidery. So in my case, I'm just going to grab this one and use it to demonstrate how to thread the machine. But in your case, for your design, you'd probably pull a patch and color match these as best you can to what you want your design to be. So like I'd grab a few of them and then pull them over to the machine. Once you have your embroidery threads selected, we need to actually put them onto the machine. So the first thing you're going to do is pop your thread right onto the corresponding peg. And it doesn't matter what order you put your threads on, because we can tell the machine later what thread or what needle has what color on it. So once your thread is on the peg, you're going to pull this up and put it through this back set of holes. On the top we have 2 little hanger things. You're going to go through the back one and then the front one. So I'm going to start with the corresponding hole on the back hanger, pull that through, and then I'm going to jump up to this front hanger here and come through this gray little barrel looking thing on the front. Okay, after you come through these two hangers, we are going to go to the back of the top part of this machine here, and you'll notice that just like this gray barrel connector up here on the top frame, there is another barrel connector on the back of the little metal clip over here. So I'm going to put the thread through that gray piece. Like so. And then next, I'm going to want to get the thread under this little metal clasp right in front of the barrel connector. So I'm just getting some tweezers out here so I can gesture a little bit more finely. What I want to do is take my thread and put it under this metal clip here. You can see it's kind of spring-loaded. My goal is to get the thread to the left of this little triangular tooth here. So what that looks like, I'm just going to pull the thread in from the side and pull it behind that tooth. So you can see it's to the left of that triangular tooth now. Now this is where we start to see a little bit of a divergence in how you're going to thread each thing. We probably need a little bit of a closer angle here, but on the top of the machine, we have these plastic raised sections here that actually guide you on where you need to pull your thread. So after each one of these clips, you can see that there's a line, and in my case, it's guiding me down and to the right, and then it's around this tensioning knob. And then after I make one full revolution, I'm going to continue down like this and go to the right of this peg, the left of this peg, and then I reach the front here, and at this point, all the threads should be the same. That line is going to lead you to slightly different places for each thread. So like for number 2, I actually go around the left of this peg before I even reach a tensioning knob, and then I go to the right and then left and back down again. This is just something you kind of have to look at and understand while you're threading it. So following that guide, I'm going to come down here, I'm going to go around this tensioning knob, I go between the gray section and the black section. For every single tensioning knob, you're just going to do one full rotation and then continue downwards. Then I'm going to go to the right of this peg, the left of this peg, and then under this clip, which is actually the same as the clip we did earlier on the back. So I just want to pull it through behind that tooth. Once you are through there, we are going to pull our thread down through the first little gap in the machine here. And as I go down, I reach this little upturned U arrow over here. So I'm going to wrap around that column. And then as I get back up here, we see this little needle bar with a hole in it. I'm going to take the end of my thread and put it through that hole, going from the right to the left, like so. And then after you come through there, you're going to come back straight down into that same second channel that we just came up through. After that, we are going to take our thread and put it through these very tiny holes on the front metal part right here. In the back, you see these sort of alternating small holes closer to the machine and these slightly larger holes farther away. The larger holes farther away are the only ones you need to focus on, which are conveniently right under these numbers. So you can see thread 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's a corresponding large hole for each of them. I'm going to take the end of my thread and put it through that hole for the corresponding thread, in my case number 1, and I'm just going to pull it through like that. Usually when you do this, it's very common for the thread up here to actually sort of pull out and wrap around something else. So just look back up here and make sure that your thread is remaining in the same channel that it's supposed to. Now, we get to the really, really hard part. So, down here, we have a few things that we need to do. Firstly, at the top of each needle is a very thin, sort of paperclip looking metal rod that wraps around the top of the needle, projects up and to the right, and then terminates right here on the top of the needle. It's easiest to see on needle number 1, but it exists on every single one. What I need to do is get the thread behind this clip here. And the easiest way to do that is going to be to give yourself some slack like this, and then use the tweezers to grab your thread and pull it to the right and above where the clip terminates. That way, when you pull down, it'll just pull through like that. So you want your thread, after it comes through the hole, to go around that clip on the inside. After that, we need to get the thread through the eye of the needle, and this is why originally I had us pull up this design up here. The machine has an auto-threading function, and in order to do that, we need to navigate the needle to the correct thread that we are trying to insert. So for example, if I click 2 here, the machine will march over to needle number 2. And if I deploy my auto threader, it's now deployed on needle number 2. So if I was trying to thread needle number 2, I would have needed to do that. Now, how did I actually do that? Well, first of all, to navigate to different threads, I'm just going to use this panel and click the one I'm trying to thread. Right now, I'm trying to thread needle number 1, so we'll click this, and then we go to needle number 1. To deploy the auto threader, we're going to go away from the panel and look down here on the gray section. You can see there's an arrow going through the eye of the needle, so it's pretty easy to remember. If I click this once, it'll deploy the arm, and then I need to do some preparatory steps, and then when I click it again, the machine will retract that arm and hopefully thread the needle. So, step 1, click the thread that you want to thread. Step 2, deploy the arm. And now we are going to do a series of interesting steps before it's going to pull through. So when you look at the auto threading arm, the auto threading arm is composed of 2 small little arms that are wrapping around the needle. And then there's also a third piece that we need to use, which is this curved knife edge looking piece that's present on every single needle. I'm going to take the thread and from the right, wrap it around the right arm of the auto threader underneath, and then put it underneath the left little knife edge as well. And then when I pull up, the thread sort of seats into a little gap in the back of the knife there. Now I take the excess thread here, pull it forward, up and over this white up U-turn arrow here. This has a little embedded slicer in it, so when I pull this thread down, it cuts straight off. And now I have this setup here. Now, when I click the auto threader button again, it is going to pull this thread through, just like that. So basically, you're going to do that for every single color that you want in your embroidery design, and then you'll be ready to embroider with your top threads. However, we are not quite done yet, because just like a sewing machine, the embroidery machine actually has 2 threads that you need. You have your top supply threads and you have your bottom bobbin thread. The bobbin thread is stored in this chamber right here. It is held in just by a little spring-loaded mechanism here, so I can pull this down to reveal the bobbin chamber. The bobbin chamber is very simple compared to the top threads. To take this out, I'm just going to pull this little arm forward. So let's see if I can do it with the tweezers here, it might be easier to see. I pull this forward, like so, and then I can take the bobbin chamber out. In here, we can see that we have our bobbin, and we have the actual metal chamber. This bobbin comes out, and it looks something like this. This is a half-used bobbin, so usually it's a little bit thicker, but these are just disposable, pre-wound bobbins that we have. So if you're ever looking for a freshly wound one, under the machine we have this box right here. It says Magnetic Core Fill Tech, I don't even know. But in here we have, hopefully, lots and lots of bobbins. So, the anatomy of these things. You'll notice, on one side, this ring is black. On the other side, this ring is green. The black side is magnetic, which is very helpful because it holds it into the casing, and it's also helpful because it helps you remember what side to put in. You want the magnet facing down so that it is, has a stronger attraction to the steel casing. So I'm going to take the black side of the bobbin and put it face down into the casing, like so. Then I need to route this thread around a couple of intermediary steps before I put this back in the machine. The first thing you're looking for is this tiny crack in the side of the casing here. I'm going to put the thread into that crack, like that. And then what I want to do is pull the thread under this metal plate right here until I come all the way around the tiny little arm / tooth thing over here, and that'll be it. So I'll just put it under the plate, around that arm, and then I'm good to go. That's my bobbin. So this goes back into this chamber here. I'm just going to push until I hear it snap. And just before I close this chamber, there's one more thing I need to do. Before we close the bobbin chamber, we need to put a drop of oil behind the bobbin, which is conveniently the only thing you need to oil on this machine. To actually do that, we are going to go back to our panel here and then click this button in the display panel with the little 2 needles in the hoop. When I click this, it pulls up this submenu, and one of these buttons is this oil dropper button right here. When I click this, it gives me a little warning that it's going to rotate the hand wheel. I'm going to click OK, and then it rotates something down here in the bobbin chamber. Now I'm going to take this sewing machine oil, which is usually just right next to the machine, and I'm going to put a drop of oil somewhere back here. It's kind of hard to tell where you should put the oil, but that's why there's a useful little guide image back here. So normally I'll look at the little points that you can see. What we want to oil is that orange piece. So I'll look for the upturned hook over here, and there's like another hook facing the other direction next to it, and you just oil the thing right behind it between those. So those are my hooks right there, so I'm going to oil the thing just behind that. I'm just going to squeeze this very slowly. All I want is one tiny drop back there, and that's enough. You're going to want to oil this machine one time before you start embroidering for the day. Ideally, this machine only needs to be oiled once a day. However, you don't know what the person before you did. So just put a drop of oil on there before you start embroidering. You can't really over oil the machine, so just do that and you'll be good. Once you've put that drop of oil there, you're going to click OK over here. It's going to rotate the wheel back into position. If it went well, you basically shouldn't hear it move, which is perfect. And then you click OK again, and this pulls you back to your main embroidery panel. Now I'm just going to close up this bobbin chamber like so, and that's all good. When you're doing this, you're just going to leave a couple inches of bobbin thread hanging like that. It's fine, the machine will snag it automatically. With that, you have now learned how to thread the whole machine, and we will move on to actually running designs. So now that we've prepared our fabric and we've threaded the machine, we're ready to actually throw our hoop onto the machine and start embroidering. So let's come back to our little shirt over here, and I am going to show you how to put this in. Before I do this, there is a slight nuance that I have to go over, which is when you are embroidering anything that is shirt shaped, meaning it has a waist hole and a neck hole, you have the option to put in your hoop either with the waist hole first or backwards with the neck hole first. And I'm here to tell you, you don't really have a choice. You should always put in the waist hole first. The reason for that is when you're embroidering, there is a significant risk while it's translating around a bunch that whatever your second layer down here is, it's sort of like billing around. I've seen it happen. It can sort of like pull up and get sucked under the needle here. And if that happens, then you're suddenly stitching together your fabric. And if you don't notice that, it's going to be pretty irreparable. If you put the neck hole in first, there's just simply less fabric hanging down, so it's much more likely for that to happen, but I've never seen that error occur when you put the waist hole in first. This does have some implications when we are setting up our design in terms of turning it upside down, but luckily the machine has a process for that, which I'll show you in a little bit. So, given that context, I'm going to take my shirt and I'm going to put it in waist hole first, like so. If you are embroidering on a flat sheet like felt, this is not really a concern you have, so just kind of do it normally. But with the waist hole in, I'm going to put the front of these wings under these metal curved pieces here and drive them under like that. And then I'm going to push this whole thing forward until the pegs lock into place under these holes here. So you can see that a peg came through over here and a peg came through over here. That's how I know it's fully locked in. You want the hoop oriented such that this little well is visible like this. If you put it in upside down, then bad things happen. So yeah, the hoop is now successfully in. You may at this point have needed to resize the hoop again. We went over that when I was pulling up the design for threading. So just make sure that your left arm is at the right setting, otherwise this obviously won't clip into place properly. Now, the other thing to go over at this point is how to actually remove your hoop when you are done embroidering. To do that, you are going to place your middle fingers on the back wing here, your thumb on this right little outstretched semicircle, and then what I'm going to do is push in opposite directions and then pull backwards. So middle finger here, thumb here, push in opposite directions, and I'll do that on both sides, and then when I pull back, my hoop comes out. So once more, put the waist hole in first, drive the wings under those metal portions, and push forward until those little pegs snap into place. That is your hoop there. Now, to pull up your design, you are going to have exported it at this point onto a little USB. It doesn't really matter what you've put it on the USB. And we are going to insert the USB into the side of the panel over here. There's 2 USB slots. I'm just going to put it into the top one, which is USB 1. Plug it in right there. And then we are going to be over here. Now earlier I actually had this heart pulled up, which I realized I didn't show on camera. But from the embroidery screen, to get back to the home screen, you just go to the top right, click home, click OK. Now, with my USB in, I'm going to click USB 1, and then I am going to pull up this design here because I happen to know that it is the right size for the 100 by 100 hoop. The first thing you're going to do when you pull up your design is click Set. Earlier we clicked Embroidery to go straight to the embroidery screen, but we actually have a few settings menus that we're going to go through before we run our real design. So I'm going to click Set, and this pulls you up to the Edit menu. I will say right now that most of the Edit menu is functionally useless. There is a couple things you can do, but for the most part, you can kind of ignore this screen. That being said, the most useful thing that exists within the Edit screen is the Rotate function. The Rotate function is useful because, as you may have been thinking in the back of your mind, I loaded my shirt in backwards, which means that if I embroider right now, my design is going to be upside down. Using the Rotate screen, I can just pull this thing 180 degrees over, and now it's embroidering correctly. The other things in this screen, which I'll go over just for the sake of completeness, but you shouldn't really be doing. First of all, you have the size menu. This lets you grow and shrink your design, but it's going to bound you at roughly plus or minus 20%. The reason for that is the machine itself cannot calculate new stitch positions. What it's actually doing is increasing or decreasing your stitch length and width. So if you increase those 2 parameters too much, you're going to see space between your stitches, and if you decrease those parameters too much, you're going to be stitching in essentially the same location, increase the likelihood of bird nesting or just tearing up your fabric. So I'm not really going to go over these options, but you can increase your size. You can also use this button here to mirror across the y-axis. The reason I say that you shouldn't be using most of these is because you can do all of these manipulations within Hatch, and Hatch is going to be much smarter about calculating new stitches and optimizing your design. We also have a duplicate panel here, this little 3x3 grid of squares, so I can add extra versions of my design or get rid of them. And the final thing I will say on the screen is that you can drag around your image in the hoop up here. But you'll notice that it's actually letting me go outside of this gray square, which is not very good because I don't want to be embroidering outside of my hoop. To get it back to the center, I'm just going to use these arrows here, and I'm going to click the center dot in the middle of it, and that auto centers my design to the center of the hoop. So basically, after clicking Rotate, I'm just going to click Edit End, and this is going to pull us to a second editing screen, which is actually called the Embroidery Settings screen. And in here, there is a lot more useful functionality. First of all, we have the return of our Rotate button. This is the exact same as the other Rotate button, but it just is here too. So I can rotate this thing, and I just did a full 360, so it's right there. The next button that I need to go over is going to be for positioning. So after rotation, we're going to talk about positioning. First of all, just like before, I can drag around my design within the hoop, and you can actually see the machine kind of moving right now in response to this. It's positioning the cross of this laser directly over the center of the design. This laser is actually something you can toggle on and off using this button over here. If I click this, it unhighlights blue and now the laser is off, and if I click it, it highlights blue and the laser is on. The laser is useful for lining up your design. Using a combination of the laser and this little sort of squared dotted thing here, we can outline where the design will be. So if I click this, the machine will start cycling around the boundary of our design. This can be particularly useful, especially if you've done your due diligence and marked out your fabric with tailor's chalk beforehand. It can help you check positioning and alignment, and it's very helpful. It's also dynamically updating. So if I pull this to the right now, my design within the hoop, and then outline again, it'll outline in a slightly different position. So now we're seeing it much closer to the top or the bottom right margins of the hoop. So once you've locked in your rotation and your position, the next thing we need to do is inform the machine what color thread is on what needle. And that is going to be this button over here all by its lonesome on the right. This menu is super important and super useful. We can see broken up on the left banner here all of the different operations of different colors that make up our embroidery design. As I click through these, this tiny little preview menu is actually showing you what component of this major design this color is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click through these and I'm going to tell it 1 through 6 which needle it's supposed to use. So for example, this tan here is the tip of the stick over here. If I threaded that tan color onto needle number 6, I would just click 6 here, and then you can see it updates with the number over there. And then I would go through and do that similar process for every other color. So let's say I threaded pink onto 2, that'd be fine, but I threaded this slightly different color pink onto 4, so I'm going to make that 4. Basically, you're just going to go through the whole list and assign your needles to every single operation as appropriate. It can be tedious, but it's very important, because obviously if you don't assign the right numbers, it's not going to embroider with the right colors. Now, there are a few other functionalities in this screen, and those are on the right here. First of all, this hand here inserts pauses. Pauses are useful if you ever want to thread more than 6 colors into one design. Essentially, the way you would do that is you could embroider all of one color, like do everything on your design that's green, for example, and then if this was a 7th color or something, I could click the hand to insert a pause, and then the machine would stop embroidering after it finishes this operation right here. That allows me to unthread the green, rethread in the next color, and then click go once more, and it will continue running. So in that way you can achieve theoretically infinite colors. It's just a little bit more work on your part. Again, the way the pause feature works is whatever operation you've inserted the pause at, the machine will stop before it starts that operation. So it will not do this operation, it will pause after the preceding operation. The other button below the pause menu is this little crossed thread thing with the red line striking through it. That is for eliminating colors entirely from your design. So if I click this green here and then I click the cross, it grays out over here. It has a little dash instead of a needle assignment, and up in the preview it actually got rid of the green section up here as well. This is a feature that's pretty much only going to be useful in very niche circumstances. One of them is going to be if you have run your design and for some reason one color specifically failed. You could eliminate the rest of them and just redo that one color. There's a number of ways to achieve that, but this is one of them. The other thing is, let's say I just decided, you know what, I don't want to do the words, so I could knock out this black thing. Unfortunately, these are grouped with the outline as well, so that's not going to exactly work, but you get the idea. You can eliminate certain things from your design. Once you have correctly assigned all of your operations by just clicking through them and like renumbering these however they're supposed to be, then you just click OK. And now all of your thread assignments are listed. After that, we're just going to click embroidery, and this is going to pull us to our actual embroidery running menu. If you get to this screen and you realize, uh-oh, I forgot, like for example, we can see that the pink and the tan are actually both on the same needle right here. This is because I'm not actually going to be running this design, so I didn't thread on the right colors. But let's say you made the mistake and you need to go back to that screen. You could just come to the bottom left here, to the embroidery setting thing, click that, click OK, and you can go back to editing over here. Again, I click embroidery to get to this screen, and this is our major panel where we're going to be running things. So, information that is present on this screen. First of all, the top thing here is your little timeline. The timeline shows you about how long the machine is going to take to embroider each color proportionally. So it's going to take a little bit of time on this darker pink, a little bit of time on that lighter pink, and it's actually going to be taking the most time on the black at the very end. If I click the thread thing to the right of it, it'll change it to just the current thread color. So this will just show me how long it's going to take on the current operation. It's at the beginning of it, but if I was in the middle, this red updater line would be like somewhere in the middle. But if I want the full timeline, I'll just unselect that and I can see the whole thing. The time over here, the thread with the hand on it, is the time before the next pause, and the time on the right is the time for the design. So you can see that 16 minutes is how long it would take to do all of these operations, but 11 minutes is until it gets to this operation down here where I inserted that pause earlier. Next, we have this here. 0 out of 8 is how many unique colors we have in our design. So right now we are on color number 0, and then next to that is our stitch count. We have 8,192 stitches in our design, and we have not started, so we're at 0, and then we already went over the time thing. Again, we can step through our different threads here if we're trying to thread up new colors at this point. There's no reason to go over that, we already did that in threading. Down in the bottom right, we have our plus and minus for this SPM. SPM stands for stitches per minute, and it is the speed at which your machine is going to be running. If I click this plus, it gets faster, and you can see the time is actually updating dynamically. And if I go down, the speed will be slower. The advantage of going slower is that you're applying less jerk to your fabric, so you're going to get a slightly slower design, but a slightly more accurate design and a little bit cleaner. You're also much less likely to break a needle or your thread. So if you have the time, why not just run it on a lower speed? The other thing with SPM is you can actually change it while the machine is running. So if you have very large sections that you don't care about the details too much, you can bump those up to the max of 1,000 SPM, and then for small details, throw it down to 400 or something. So yeah, that's that. Going left, we have this needle plus minus. This is for advancing and going back within your design manually. So if I open this up, I can do a number of things. Firstly, I can skip to entirely new colors. So if I don't want to start with number 6 and 2 here, I can actually click this third one and jump over here. You'll see that it updated to the third color, the 807th stitch, and we're actually already 2 minutes into our design at that point. I also have more fine grain control, so within color I can move by like clicking this plus 10 or plus 1, plus 100, whatever, and I can similarly go backwards. And if I click OK, then it'll just kind of be there, and I can click start and it'll start from there. The other nice thing about this screen is that when I pull it up, this bottom left thing will actually save whatever stitch I pulled it up with. So we have 0, which allows me to go right back to the beginning, and I can mess around with this all I want. But if I forget and I'm like, well, I actually don't want to move around that much, I can just click this and it'll pull me back to where I was when I first pulled up the screen. The primary use case for this menu is going to be when your thread snaps. It's unfortunately just a reality of embroidery that sometimes your thread will snap and you'll need to rethread the machine. The machine should catch it and throw an error and try to back up a little bit, but sometimes it doesn't notice it immediately. So if you want to redo certain parts of your design, you can come in here, back up a bunch, and then re-embroider over different sections. So I'm going to just click the 0 to go back to the beginning, and then click OK. That is everything that I need to explain up here. Now the last thing to show you is actually how to just click go and run your design. So I'm noticing that there's actually no thread on needle number 6 right now, so I'm going to go back into the embroidery settings and just switch this to needle number 1, click OK, go back to the embroidery, and OK. To actually click go, we are going to use this button right here that is currently highlighted red. It's highlighted red, so if I click it, the thing is going to throw an error at me. I just click OK. The unlock key that it's referencing is actually this little panel of red down here. If I click this, it unlocks the machine, and then I can click go, and it will start going. So that's what the machine looks like when it's running. I can click the same button I clicked for go, like that, and it will cause the machine to pause. I can also get the machine to cut the thread in case I want to remove some lint or something or modify the fabric in some way. And to do that, I'm going to use the scissor button that's actually next to the auto threader button. It's between the auto threader and the go button. If I click this, it also wants me to unlock the machine. So I'm going to just unlock it and click the scissor button, and you'll see that it's going to anchor the thread where it stopped, and then it's going to cut it like that. Now I could, if I want, take the hoop out of the machine, mess with the fabric, clean it up a little bit, and then put it back in. One thing you want to be careful not to do is move the fabric within the hoop, because if you do that, you're going to lose your alignment. But you can take the hoop out of the machine, because that shouldn't mess with your alignment due to these pegs. Then you can resume by just doing the same thing, clicking go, and it will save your stitch count, so now it will just continue. That is kind of the end of embroidery training. So I'm going to let the machine run a little bit here, and there's no thread in number 2, so it's going to throw a little error for me, hopefully. And there it goes. So the machine detected that something was wrong and it threw this error right here. It says check upper and bobbin thread. Now normally there would be a problem here, but obviously in our case it's because I never actually threaded anything onto needle number 2. That's just for demonstrative purposes. Usually what this error means is that your thread snapped. However, the machine doesn't know the difference between the thread snapping and the bobbin running out. So what you want to do is look at your thread and see, okay, it came out, did it like obviously snap? If so, you're just going to rethread it the same way we did it before, and then click go. If it immediately snaps again, that probably means that your bobbin is out. So what you can do is sort of look through your neck hole here, and then access the bobbin chamber down here while it's running. So you can pull this down, and then pull your bobbin out, and then check to make sure that there's still bobbin thread in there. If your bobbin runs out, it's totally fine. You just throw a new one in there, continue embroidering, and you should be good. With that, you should now know everything you need to perform an embroidery operation. So yeah, now your assignment is just going to be answering a few short questions on sums, and then signing up for an embroidery test where you will go through the whole process of hatch and fabric preparation and threading the machine, and just show that you know what you're doing.